we're on. Hey, you guys, it is chapter 8, part 1. If you look at the beginning of each chapter, they have the in the real world little section. This one they featured Johnson & Johnson. The reason I'm just drawing our attention to it is I think it really adds impact to this idea of, the chapter is called Customer Service in a Diverse World, and why there's so much impact on our businesses and customer service. I mean, my goodness, when I read this, I was like, whoa. And this is, I don't remember the year that this book came out, this is 6th edition. 128,000 employees and 275 companies that are operated in 275 different countries. Ooh, wow. Think about the diversity in your workforce, let alone all the people that buy Johnson & Johnson products. As you read through some of the different things that they're involved in, it's amazing. So you can really see that there's a huge impact when we talk about diversity and the bottom line for our companies, and then of course how that relates to customer service. And in your exercise for the reading for this week, you're going to be looking at, how do you define diversity? But one of the thing that this chapter asks us to do is to ask yourself, well, how much do I really know about different cultures around the world? How about the cultures within the United States? Because, I mean, just think about the north, south, east, and west of our country. If you've ever traveled down south and you're from the north, it's like culture shock, and east or west, right? It's very, very different just by region because we have such a big country. And just because we're all, Americans, right, we have very different values based just on our regional elements, right? So when we look at something like the Golden Rule, this book introduces us to the Platinum Rule. Now, if you were familiar with the Golden Rule, and I think they outline it for here, I'm on page 278, and it says, and in that customer service success tip, which I love these little things, a key point to remember is that the concept of treating others as you would like to be treated, which we usually call the Golden Rule, do unto others, right? You can lead to service breakdowns. That becomes a real problem because you're only looking at it from your perspective. What you really need to do, he says here, is this is because your customers are unique and may not value what you value. To better ensure our customer services, we find out what the customer wants and treat them as they want to be treated. That's the Platinum Rule. So, and that sometimes isn't very easy, right? We got to kind of step out of our comfort zone. We have to really educate ourselves. And even if that's something you wouldn't necessarily do in your personal life, when it comes to your work life and customer service, you really need to take that into consideration, based on who your customers are. They look at some of the things on how we define diversity. And again, you're going to be doing that in one of your exercises. But on page 279, they're talking about some of the factors that make us different are just innate. These are the things we can't change, like our height, our weight. Yeah, well, weight. I wish I could change my weight some days, right? What your hair color you're born with, your gender, skin color, your physical condition. Are you athletic build or non-athletic, mental capabilities, that kind of thing, sibling birth order. Those things, we can't control a lot of that. Then the other factors they mention that make us unique then are through our environment and our life experiences. That goes back to our values, our beliefs, our culture, and all of those kinds of things. When we talk about customer awareness, we're really trying to make sure, and I'll just read what they're talking about according to this particular author in this book. Applying your own cultural practices and beliefs to a situation involving someone from another culture can result in frustration, anger, poor service, and lost business. And that's the whole idea behind customer awareness in all of these different things that we're talking about in this chapter. Now, we've been really talking about a lot of this throughout the course of all the chapters, right? This chapter just gets us into it a little bit deeper. Now, we know that the impact of cultural values is something that it's really hard to explain until you've actually experienced it, for example. And when they define it here as values are the rules that people use to evaluate issues or situations, right? How we make our decisions, how we interact with others, and how we deal with conflict, for example. Here it says, for example, if customers perceive clothing as either too sexy or too conservative, they may not purchase the items, or depending on whatever it is that they feel that they're looking for, that they need. So we have to be really mindful of that. Again, here, and I have this highlighted in this section as well, to be effective in dealing with others, service providers should not ignore the power of values and beliefs, nor should they think that their value system is better than someone else's. You know, my mom used to say, don't ever think you're better than anybody else, Missy, right? No one else is better than you, but don't you think you're ever better than anybody else either. It's good advice, right? So our goal really is to try to teach, treat everyone equally, be tolerant, be fair, be sensitive to other people's beliefs and that sort of thing. Then they go on to talk about some things in particular, like, for example, modesty on page 282, and they define it here in the margin as refers to the ways that refers to the way that cultures view propriety of dress and conduct. If we think about Muslims, for example, or where we live in the Midwest here, we have a lot of Amish. They dress very differently than we do. It also affects our eye contact. In some of our discussion boards, one of the pet peeves for a lot of people was this whole idea of not making good eye contact, right? And I cautioned you early on within that discussion board about being very, very mindful that that might not be the case for someone, that they're being disrespectful, and their culture having too much eye contact might actually be considered disrespectful, right? It has a lot to do with gender based on your culture, how you were raised. In some cases, in certain cultures, women would not make eye contact with a man or someone in a powerful position, let's say, or vice versa. A man wouldn't necessarily make eye contact with a woman for whatever reason. And all of these little sections end with, I'm looking on page 282, the impact on service. So it talks about the category or description, and then it ends with impact on service. So just this idea of modesty, for example, and the impact on service. It says here, when encountering examples of modest behavior, evaluate the situation for the true meaning being delivered. If it helps at all, if you're familiar with the phrase racial profiling, you could use that here to try to describe this. If you're looking at someone and making an assumption or a stereotyping, right? Racial profiling is a form of stereotyping. This is going to have a great deal of impact on your ability to serve people well, right? Now, expectations of privacy. Everybody views this very differently, right? And you guys can read each one of these in depthly. But now what I'm more worried about is that you understand the impact on service. So I find this amazing, and this has to do with this expectations of privacy as one example. I can't believe what people say out loud. Wow. I mean, I've done a lot of traveling, and I can't even repeat some of the things people have told me sitting next to me, a perfect stranger on an airplane. And you go, whoa, I guess my level of privacy is a little bit higher. Right? And now remember, this is also generational. I mean, all of these diversity covers a ton of stuff, right? So generationally, like my mother said, there were 3 things that, a lady didn't talk about. Not that I ever fit that bill, because I was an absolute tomboy. I just want to be like, hang out with my brothers, right? But she said, you didn't talk about politics, religion, or money. Right? Now, today with our young people, that's just like out the window. I'm so shocked what my grandchildren show me, like what's on Facebook. I'm like, whoa, what? You guys are all sharing a little too much. That's my generation, right? Forms of address, like how do we address one another? I mean, I find it a lot more informal with younger people in general, but again, how you were raised in the culture you come from, age may not play a role, right? For me, I kind of get a bang out of it because we assume that because my last name is Smothers, that it's Mrs. Smothers. If they know that I'm married, they'll say Mrs. Smothers, but I'm actually, my husband's last name is not the same as mine. So when they say Mrs. Smothers, I'm looking for my mom. I'm like, oh, me. And the other day, my husband just got some mail that was addressed to Mr. Patrick Smothers. Oh, we just laughed and laughed. I'm like, oh my, look at that. You have my last name now. Right. And so when you look at this, and they talk about different forms of address by culture. on page 284, and whether we would say Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. and things like that. Some people get really hot about this. And so you should be very mindful. If someone says their name is William, don't all of a sudden start calling them Billy. Oh my goodness, you do not have the right to do that unless they say, please, my name is William, but please call me Billy or call me Bill. Like I tell you guys, you call me Rox, it's fine. Rox, Roxanne, I'm not much on the formal, way to address people, but there are some people like it's professor this or instructor that or whatever, doctor this or doctor that. This has an impact on service because if you insult your customer right off the bat by the name you use to call them, I have to tell you a quick story. I'll try to make it quick. A friend of mine's brother is a key executive for one of the TV stations in Madison. I think it's for CBS or whatever it is. He runs the station, and they always have interns there, right? They had done this big talk in the morning, and they had a big, meeting and everything about things going forward and blah, blah, blah. Later on, he has an open door policy. There was kind of a knock, 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 and here was an intern in the door. And I'll just say, I won't say my friend's real name, but let's say go back to our William, right? His name is William. And he knocked on the door and he says, "Hey, Bill, mind if I talk to you about some of those things that you were pointing out today?" And his eyes were, he just walked in and called me Bill, when I've never introduced myself other than William, whatever it is, right? And he runs the company. And I was like, "Hey, Billy, can we have a chat?" It was hysterical. Luckily, this guy has a super sense of humor. He's like, "Come on in, sit down and shut the door. Tell me all about things." By the time he was done in a really funny and sensitive way, he let this young man understand that's not how we address people until you know better, right? Respect for elders. The word elder has different meaning by culture. It has a different meaning for me than it may for someone else. For example, if you are of Native American descent, right, or First Nations, an elder may mean something completely different to you, right? And again, that's going to have an impact on our service, on how we serve people. I think the best advice is what they're showing us here on page 285 for the trending now is just make sure that you're informed. Try to be as informed as possible. Here they're talking about, they use a different example. They're using many organizations and employees have realized the importance of creating a fair and equal environment. To ensure you do that and you're ready, potential situations, make sure you understand different things about gender, abilities, culture. And they give us a list of 7 different things and how you can make sure that you're a better informed person. Again, the same thing goes with importance of relationships, this interrelationships. The impact on service, again, is huge. For example, Westerners, and we're usually referred to as like Westerners, right, here in the United States. We're not used to really spending a lot of time on non-business related topics. We can push really hard. Like, for example, we're going to fly in, take the red eye in, have our business meeting. Let's say it's an international company, have our business meeting, catch the next red eye out and get back. And if you're working with a culture that has much more focus, let's say family related type things, that's not going to fly. They may expect you to be there 3 or 4 days so that you can meet other people in the company. You might even meet their family, their children, things like that. They're also not going to do business with you. Gender roles. And this is, again, depending on where you're from and what your societal norms are, this is going to be a big deal. I think in our one discussion, I can't remember if it's the discussion board that we're doing on this topic, I used the example of buying cars. Even here in our westernized, we're supposed to be so liberal and everything. I go to buy a car and they keep looking around me like, "Where's your husband?" All right. And we need to talk to the guy about buying your car. And you can read my example there. Attitude toward conflict, even. Some people are culturally, some people are just non-confrontational. We're really good at being passive aggressive here in the Midwest, right? We don't say anything until, we go home and we tell somebody else, or we tell their third cousin or something, right? We're not necessarily in somebody's face all the time. Gosh, go to New York. You better be prepared because you're going to be insulted every minute, right? The concept of time. They talk about monochromatic versus polychromatic. We're monochromatic. You can look at the list of countries that are like the US, Germany, New Zealand, Norway, Poland, and boy, we like things on time, right? If you're not there 10 minutes early, if you're not there about an hour early in Germany, you're late, right? Versus other people's concept of time. I know that sometimes when you're conversing, maybe, and you don't say these things unless you know someone, you might hear, if you've ever heard someone say something about Indian time, that's a reference for that you may not understand if you're not a Native American, for example. Ownership of property. Um, Sometimes it's really appropriate, like the more gems. I mean, if you've ever been to an Indian, one of my friend's sisters married a man from India, and they had two ceremonies, a westernized one, and then they had the traditional Indian ceremony. Oh my gosh, it was incredible. It was so interesting. We learned so much. And we were just barely out of our teens when her older sister got married. But a lot of all the jewelry, every finger had jewelry and gems. A lot of this represented the wealth of her family, right? And things like that. Whereas for someone else, like I'm one of those people, I really don't care for an ostentatious display of wealth, meaning like I don't need the big giant four-door truck with monster tires and everything on it, or, you know, the big fancy house and all of those things. Now that's a personal choice as well, but it's also driven by whatever your norms are locally in your culture. I think we're going to go, and that'll take us right through to page 290 for this part 1. And then ethical dilemma 8.2. And make sure you just read through this a little bit. I personally heard comments like this. In this particular ethical dilemma, you guys are doing 2 things out of this chapter, this first part on your class activity. I think it's the ethical dilemma 8.1 and working it out 8.1. This one's 8.2. And they were talking about when you work for a company with zero tolerance. It's on page 290 of edition 6. And apparently, based on the dress, someone made an assumption, and they said, it really makes me mad that these ragheads come over here and don't even learn our language and then expect us to go out of our way to provide them with what they want, blah, blah, blah. You can read this on your own. I was actually at a festival, a local festival, and really heard this kind of language, but not in reference to Middle Eastern country, but in reference to people that would be Hispanic or Latino. And I think even in this chapter, they give you a description. Yeah, on page 285, I remembered reading it somewhere. They even help us understand, because people, we don't use the right verbiage, and it can be insulting. The Hispanic culture refers to people who are born in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Central America, South America, right? Chicano culture refers to primarily to people with a heritage based in Mexico, but they may be born and raised here in America. Latino culture refers to people of Hispanic descent, right? And then respect for elders, you know, value held by people of many cultures, and then that is going to vary under within that category, those categories as well. So that's what I heard the comments about, and I was just never so shocked in my life. Oh my God, they're taking all our jobs, and you know they should learn our language, and I was just wow. I thought this was like 21st century kind of, you know, I thought we were past a lot of that. We're not necessarily past all of that. But if that is the way you feel, that's fine. But if you are trying to deliver quality customer service, you're going to have to put that behind you and put on your quality customer service face and treat everyone equally, right? So we're going to end part 1 here, and we'll come back and pick up in that section that starts with providing quality service to diverse customer groups. All right, we'll see you for part 2.